After clearing the proper cap space and a path in free agency, is another major move coming for the Colorado Avalanche? How should Chris McFarland and company allocate their newly found cap space to help improve this roster in 2025? And are the Denver Broncos playing a little hardball, leverage-wise, with their upcoming negotiations about a potential new stadium? All things to come on today's rundown, but we will begin in the NHL, where on the afternoon show last Friday, just at the transition there between Dover and Cecil and the Drive, we got some pretty significant Avalanche news that will have a major impact on their upcoming offseason plans. And that is that Charlie Coyle, the third-line center for the Colorado Avalanche, who was acquired by Chris McFarland just 19 games before the end of the regular season, has now found a new home in Columbus as a member of the Blue Jackets. Miles Wood also goes over in the trade in exchange for a couple of draft picks, mainly a 2025 third-round pick that the Avalanche used on Francesco Delels with the 77th pick in the third round, a defenseman out of UMass Amherst. They have a second-round pick coming their way in 2027 and a forward prospect in Gavin Brendley. So all of that in exchange for your third-line center in Miles Wood and a veteran forward your third-line center in Charlie Coyle and a veteran forward in Miles Wood. Obviously, this profiles as a salary dump type of move for the Colorado Avalanche. Miles Wood was due about $2.5 million with a handful of years left remaining on his contract at that average annual value, and Charlie Coyle was due to make $5.25 million with 1 year remaining on the deal that they inherited last season. 5.25 for a third-line center is a little steep in general for an NHL team to have to swallow, but then you factor in you've got $7.5 million tied into your second-line center in Brock Nelson, who you just locked in for 3 more years, and Nathan McKinnon making just over $12.5 million on his average annual value. So you add all of that up, and Charlie Coyle, who Elliot Friedman and Frank Saravalli and others had reported were receiving calls from around the NHL for a guy like Charlie Coyle and what his services could bring. Those calls were answered, and ultimately, Columbus walks away with a new center prospect for them to be able to build around. The Avs recoup some draft capital and get a depth forward prospect as well. So what does it mean for the Colorado Avalanche in this upcoming offseason? Well, you add Charlie Coyle's $5.25 million, plus the $2.5 million from Miles Wood, plus the $1.2 million that they already had going into this, which was the worst or the lowest amount in the NHL team to team. And they've got about $9 million left to work with now as they head into the post-draft portion of free agency in the offseason. None of the draft picks, the 3 that they selected in this past weekend's draft, are expected to make any kind of impact on this upcoming season, which has Stanley Cup and title-chasing aspirations. But they do have some other decisions to make, presumably with Ryan Lindgren and 4 or 5 other got to have a decision contract year type of players. And then they have the opportunity to go out and expand beyond that if they want to shop around from other teams. So I guess the question that I have for all of you, and the question I've been asking myself, is where should that money best be spent? Obviously, by departing with Charlie Coyle, they have a hole at their third-line center position. So that's a natural position for them to try to address with some of that cap space and perhaps just get it at a lesser value. They could, in theory, move Jack Drury up from the 4th line to the 3rd line and try to stretch out his flexibility there. But that 4th line was working pretty well together, whether it was Jack Drury, Logan O'Connor, who's going to miss several months of the season on LTIR till probably about Christmas time, and then the Parker Kellys and the Kiwi Rantas of the world. So you could move Jack Drury up and then look to maybe find a cheaper replacement as your 4th line center, shift some things around there. But I think the Colorado Avalanche should probably allocate a good chunk of that money into helping shore up their blue line. I think they're still thin with their defensive pairings, especially when you get to that 3rd line defensive pairing. They did come to terms with Sam Malinsky, which the Avalanche released a statement about earlier today. And they're still going to need some help in that area, even if they work out a deal with Ryan Lindgren, who they also acquired last season before the trade deadline. And work out the rest of the pairings on their roster, they're still going to need some help there. So the offseason is young. Free agency is going to get going in a hurry here shortly. And I think that the blue line production, whether not just from an offensive standpoint, but really shoring up the defensive end around Mackenzie Blackwood and Scott Wedgwood, I think is important. I think it's an area that was exploited pretty heavily by the Dallas Stars in what ultimately was a disappointing 7-game loss in round one. And I think that if the Avs, with the firepower that they still have, if you're going to get a healthy Gabe Landeskog coming back and looking similar to how we saw him in the postseason, you're going to have Nate and Cale and Val and Lecky. You have one of the best defensemen in the league and a defenseman who's pretty good on the offensive end of the ice too in Cale Makar, and then Devon Taves as one of your better pairings in the NHL. I just think that the depth behind your top pairing there is going to be paramount in shoring up and making sure that when the postseason comes around and you're locked into a bitter Western Conference series like the Avs found themselves in with Mikko Rantanen and the Dallas Stars, who, by the way, isn't going anywhere, that needs to be an area that I think is addressed more pressingly than maybe replacing Charlie Coyle's production from your third-line center slotting, which wasn't all that great, especially when it came to the postseason. We will see and continue to chronicle how they maneuver in the next couple of months. And speaking of maneuvering, the Denver Broncos are playing hardball, maybe I should say. They are negotiating and flirting with and talking to more than just the Burnham Yard people. We had heard when they had invested $150 million, I believe it was, across 10 different LLCs to purchase the property right there at the Burnham Rail Yard on Santa Fe, about 1.5 to 2 miles from the current location, that was probably, all intents and purposes, going to be where the Broncos plotted their new stadium development that will be the crown jewel of the Walton Penner ownership group. And then you start looking at it on a map and you're like, is that big enough to build another Empower Field, plus develop around it and add all the accoutrements, the extra things that you want, whether it's bars and restaurants and clubs and housing and luxury retail space, apartments, office buildings, all of those things that contribute to the Broncos becoming more than just a game day and football season destination, becoming a year-round attraction that can bring in Final Fours and World Cups and better concerts and other kind of venue type things that as of now Empower Field just isn't being used for a litany of different reasons. Then they talk about acquiring 35 more acres from the Denver Water Company. And then you've got all these other little subplots around, and it seems like it's going in that direction. Well, then Mike Kliss comes on the drive a little bit, I don't know, hour and 45 minutes into the drive show on Friday when they were out at the Glen Bar and Grill up in North Glen, capping off their brouhaha tour that was so much fun. And he kind of says, well, hold on a minute. Let's not just assume. Let's not make some assumptions. I think Burnham Yard, according to Mike Kliss, is probably the favorite destination for the Broncos, but this isn't a one-horse race by any means, because Lone Tree is still very firmly in the mix and conversations are being had there, as is Aurora, cities which both seem to be very content and interested in rolling out the red carpet for the Denver Broncos to build their new stadium there and essentially structure an entire new downtown type of setup within their city built around this mega complex that will be constructed by the Walton Penner ownership group. And when Mike was describing the Burnham Yard situation, he described it as thorny. He used the word thorny. He used the word red tape, problems, and government. Thorny, red tape, problems, government. That's 4 words that I would imagine most billionaire developers don't love to hear when it comes to the idea of putting a massive construction project on a specific plot of land. And he went on to expand to say that with the Burnham Rail Yard lot, it's kind of parceled out with a bunch of different owners, and you've got to get a lot of people to agree, and you've got to, feed a lot of mouths, for lack of a better term, and make a lot of different people happy. Whereas in Lone Tree and in Aurora, it's kind of more you're dealing with one person, you're dealing with one figurehead of the principality, and they are trying to lure you and woo you out, which lends itself to a red carpet rolling more than a what have you done for me lately? What can you do for me now? So I think the prospect that the Broncos could move the stadium outside of the principality or the city of Denver is feeling more likely than I would say it was as much as 72 hours from now, or 72 hours ago, I should say. And I don't know how you guys feel about it. I will just say this. I don't really care where the stadium ends up, whether it's in Lone Tree, in downtown Denver, at the Burnham Rail Yard lot, or in Aurora. I don't think the location of the stadium matters as much as wherever it ends up, that the Walton Penner ownership group and Greg Penner being the figurehead of it has the flexibility and the ability to build it and make his vision into a reality. Because I promise you, if that's the case, and I think ultimately it will be, the Denver Broncos, the city of Denver, the state of Colorado, the Broncos fan base as a whole are going to be better for it. If it's in Lone Tree, if it's in Aurora, if it's in downtown Denver or at that spot off of Santa Fe, wherever it is, as long as the Walton Penner ownership group is able to find a plot that allows them to maximize their vision, we are all going to be better for it. And I frankly cannot wait to see what they have cooking up and how the game day experience as a lifelong, long-time Denver Broncos fan could be different in the very near future. Circling back to the Avalanche for one more thing here, I did want to ask another question that was kind of kicking around my brain a little bit, and that is, how are we feeling about Chris McFarland, the Avalanche general manager, nowadays in terms of the chief principal decision maker for the Avalanche? Because with this newfound cap space that he has, Chris McFarland is going to have the opportunity to take another big swing, or maybe even two, depending on how the price shakes out, for the Colorado Avalanche this season. And I'm not 100% sure that a certain portion of the fan base is super excited about that. I think Chris McFarland, the way that this season ended with the trading of Mikko Rantanen, who ultimately pinballs his way from Carolina to the Dallas Stars and then has a hand in sending the Colorado Avalanche home in the first round of the NHL playoffs, I think some of that has caused the shine on Chris McFarland to fade a little bit, or at least to start to crack maybe in that foundation. I will tell you that I personally am not a member of that camp. I know, as divisive as it was, the Mikko Rantanen trade and the way that it transpired was actually probably the worst case scenario, that if you were laying out the options ahead of time, you would say, there's no way this can happen, right? Like, this is just like the Chicken Little, sky is falling worst case scenario. And then it did. But I do believe in the vision behind trading Mikko Rantanen, the rationale behind it to spread depth throughout the roster, to try to recoup some of that quality scoring depth that was so critical for the Avalanche in their 2022 Stanley Cup run that they have not been able to replace since, chiefly with their second line center, who Nazem Kadri filled so brilliantly, and who everyone else since then has not. And there are those who say, well, you take every good move that Chris McFarland's made, and it's mostly been in response to fixing a bad move that he made, whether it was paying Georgiev and then having to ship Georgiev and Justus Annunen out of town with some other assets to bring in Blackwood and Wedgwood, and then it hits. So you get into a chicken or the egg debate about, was it really a good move, or was it just the fact that he fixed a bad move that was before? I'll tell you this, I don't really care. I don't expect the GM to bat 1,000 in professional sports, nor do I hold it against them for acknowledging a mistake, recognizing how to fix it, taking actions to do so, and then successfully correcting it the way that I think Chris McFarland did with the goalie situation with Georgiev and with the second line center deal that he initially wanted Casey Middlestat to be, and now it is, at least for the foreseeable future, a Brock Nelson position. I really do want to see what the moves Chris McFarland made, the flurry of trades and acquisitions that he made leading up to the trade deadline, what those look like after a half of a season on the back end of last year, a postseason run and trial together, now a full offseason, and what will ultimately be a full 82 game season plus playoffs, we would assume, at that point, because that is the only way I think we can truly grade Chris McFarland for the moves that he made, is to see them through the fruition of at least one full season. And I think that is what we're on the doorstep of, with the added caveat and benefit of another move or two that will be made now that Charlie Coyle and Miles Wood have made their way out of town and the Avs have much more room cap-wise to play with. We will see how it comes up in the coming months with free agency and the start of the NHL season, which feels like with these off seasons in the NBA and the NHL and the NFL, they just seem to get shorter and shorter. And before you know, we'll be back here previewing the preseason and regular season for both of our squads at Ball Arena. We will catch you tomorrow at noon with the latest. Be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Denver Sports 1043. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, wherever you have information and sports content to consume. We have it there for you, and we'll catch you tomorrow.